Can anybody give me a summary of the first 3 chapters? Do you remember the first 3 chapters? Anybody got a general summary of what we talked about? By the way, before we do that, that is actually right down next to the Colosseum, looking when you're down underneath the hill from the emperor's houses, and one of the arches. And what you don't see from here, if I were to be standing in that picture, it'd be like that tall.
Wow.
Oh, really?
It's amazing. Yeah.
It doesn't look that big.
Yeah. Oh, it is. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't. Honestly, it's a couple hundred feet tall anyway.
Wow.
Just amazing to stand there. It's right now. Colosseum, if I remember correctly, is back in here, and then Nero's house and stuff, the emperor's houses would have been up in this area looking down on that. I forget whose arch that is. That was to commemorate some triumph of, I forget which one of them. They were always building an arch or something or other. Okay, now, let's talk about last week. Who remembers, can give me a summary in just a few sentences even, of the first 3, what are we talking about? What is Paul showing in the first 3 chapters up through verse 20 and 3?
He primarily is writing first to show that the Gentiles, well, you mentioned they're scum.
Yeah,
I was going to use that word.
That's fine.
I was looking for another
Yeah,
word.
we're joking about it, but yeah, exactly.
Like that. So Gentiles, scum, and then he goes to in chapter 2 to prove that also Jews are.
Yeah.
And
in chapter 3?
3 it starts getting to say
we all are.
We all are.
What we're looking at here in the first 3 chapters of Romans is the fact that Paul's showing here are 3 basic ways that people try to make themselves right before God. And if you look at it, it doesn't work. And not only that, it really hasn't changed. Look at Islam, look at Buddhism, look at all these different ones. What are they trying to do? They are trying to make themselves purified and acceptable unto God. And what Paul is saying, there is no way, you cannot do it. Okay. Now, what I want to point out to start with in 3:21, we're all of a sudden going to change. 3:21 has 2 words that I've highlighted that somebody read out the first 2 words. Hopefully it's the same as my translation. What are the first 2 words in verse 21?
But now.
But now, exactly. So what I'm saying here is in 3:21, Paul is turning around. He said, now, I've given you all this false garbage, okay? Now, but now, here's the truth. Right. But see, think about this. Paul had to establish the wrong ways before telling you the right way, because otherwise you might get it mixed up with works or something like that. One of the things I love about Romans, remember I said it's one continuous thought.
Right.
So if you start reading the book of Romans, Paul didn't start in the middle or something. He started with very basics. He started with natural revelation. He started with the Gentiles. He started with the false ways. By the time you're done with this book, every chapter is building on a chapter before that. You can't take a chapter and pull it out. If we were to start in this book with chapter 6 or 7 or 8, it wouldn't make sense. We get an interpretation, but it wouldn't be the right one. And again, the thing I would say is, if I did this actually in a sermon a couple of months ago, was actually handed a copy of it was Great Expectations by Dickens to one of the people in the audience, or in the pews. And I had him stand up, and I said, now turn to page 86, go to the 2nd paragraph, and read the first full line out of the book. And he reads it and said, now, what does that mean to you, and how would you apply that to your life? And I was like, huh? Well, why do we do the same thing with the Bible? Right. And essentially, this is what's happened, is that we want to start in chapter 3 has all these wonderful things. Chapter 6, 6:23, who could ignore that and things like that? Right. 8:28, everything's hunky-dory. Not that that's what, something else I'll tell you. I guarantee pretty much, unless you're very unusual, by the time you finish this class, several weeks from now even, you're going to have a completely different attitude of what Romans 8:28 means than you have today. I guarantee it. Because it's something that most people never keep it in context and never look at the context of chapter 8. So the point is, he started with the first 3 chapters. Now he's at the point of saying, but now. Here's what's happening. Right, we got it now. Okay. Now, we got what now is the first critical turning point. It's almost like now for something completely different, and it is. Okay? Now, if we read 3:21, it says, but now, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been made manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets. We've got a couple of things here. Right off the bat, what's he say? Justification is completely apart from the law. What does that do to the Jewish salvation that was happening beforehand? Any ideas?
It puts them in a troubled spot because they thought, I immediately am saved because I have this birthright, so now he's telling them, you no longer have that.
Right. And well, here's the, you've got two aspects to it. One, for the Jew of that day in the church, he was saying, guys, it's not works. You're not working your way to heaven.
Right.
Number two, what many of the Jews failed to see before that is it never was works for salvation.
Right.
It was always faith, and the works were the symbol of the faith that was occurring. I guarantee no one was ever saved by slaughtering a sheep.
No.
If that's all they thought it was, that's all it was, it didn't save anyone. That slaughtering of the sheep and the draining of the blood of the sheep and everything and the sacrifice was to show that they were waiting for the coming Messiah.
Right.
And that's what saved them. It was faith in the Messiah. And Paul's going to get to that in chapter 4, to prove that it's always been salvation by faith. So that's the first thing we've got to look at here, apart from the law completely. And that's going to also play into things like, what do we deal with? Is the law truly dead and stuff like that today? Which is a big question, because I guarantee you're going to find people adamant on both sides of that. Is the law dead? Yes. Is the law dead? No. You're going to find, or yes, kind of, things like that. Now, the other thing, so I got a question. What is he talking about when he says witnessed by the law and the prophets? Okay. Moo does a good job of it, I'll say that. But think of, what if I said the law and the prophets to you, a couple of things this can be, what's that meaning to you?
The what?
The law and the prophets.
It's like the law back in the day, the Old Testament, the law of the old, yes. And the prophets is talking about Moses.
You're partially right. When the Jewish people of that day talked about the law and the prophets, they were basically talking about the scrolls of the Old Testament normally. Because the Old Testament was divided in the laws and the prophets.
Right.
And then you had subdivisions with the, the wisdom books as well and things like that. But the point is that the law and the prophets basically is talking about the whole Old Testament. In addition to the revelation they had already, in addition to that, I think it's important here, witnessed by the law was saying that when you were practicing the law, this was all part of justification through faith in the Messiah. And the prophets were always talking about Jesus coming, even if you didn't get it and didn't understand it.
Right.
So this isn't something brand new. This is something where Paul is saying, hey, this is the way it has been. Now, there's something else I wanted to pick out here that I skipped over deliberately. But now, apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been manifested. Is there anything in that phrase, the righteousness of God has been manifested, that strikes you as unusual? Yep, the righteousness of God has been manifested. Anything unusual about that when dealing with your salvation? Whose righteousness is he talking about?
Of God.
God. He's not talking about the saved person's righteousness, is he?
No.
We're going to see this theme over and over and over in Romans. Paul doesn't refer to your righteousness or my righteousness. It's God's righteousness. So that's a big point here, because part of the problem we run into is people believing that now I am righteous because I've been saved. Not really. You are completely righteous in God's eyes because God has applied His righteousness to you. Now that may be a subtle difference, but it's not. Once we get into this, all of a sudden it's got monstrous implications, including things like, can I lose my salvation? Things like that. One of the things we're going to hit, and let me ask you a question, if it's your righteousness, and it's based on works then, if that's the case, you might be able to lose your salvation. If it's God's righteousness applied to you through faith, and it's really Jesus Christ's righteousness, what work can you do to screw up Jesus' righteousness, which has been applied to your account? Right. That's the idea. But the point is, if you understand that, that applies, all of a sudden you start realizing, wait, eternal security, there is a reason. There's other reasons too. There is a reason for eternal security, because not only that, it also is going to apply to things like, what is your relationship to God? I mean, if it's something where your relationship is going like this, depending on whether you sinned that afternoon or didn't sin that afternoon. Oh, really? A lot of people are living their life that way. All of a sudden, it's a whole different matter of how you're relating to God. If, on the other hand, you may sin, does that displease God? Yes. Does He know about it? Yes. On the other hand, does it change the way He feels about you and the fellowship He has with you? No. That doesn't change because that's based on Him seeing you through Christ's righteousness. So that's right off the bat where we're starting to see. And this is something, again, unless you break this down, what salvation actually is, to the finest points, which is what Paul did for us here, it's not that you're not going to be saved, it's that you're going to miss some of these things and it'll affect the way you... I've had people ask me, we talked last week about, forgiveness, praying for forgiveness when you've already been forgiven and things
Right.
like that on daily acts. I've had people actually say to me, does that mean I'm not saved or you're not saved? I said, no. I said, we're both going to heaven. I'm just going to enjoy the trip more. And that's really what it's coming down to is I'm going to be able to have a closer fellowship with God because I understand my relationship to God better. Doesn't make me any better. It means that that understanding is not going to, I'm not going to be putting those barriers there myself. When you think about your own, if you had good parents, like I had a wonderful father, and because of that, I didn't have to think about the fact of did I do something wrong that day, because even if I did something wrong that day, the relationship was never destroyed. We might get angry at each other or something like that. I'm not saying we never argued, but the relationship was never destroyed and we could always talk because of that. Same thing here, except God's even a better father than my dad was. So, you know, like I said, that's how this starts to, and again, what I'm trying to show you is this. This isn't just dry logic. We need to know the logic, but it will change the way we live our lives and think about God, and I'll tell you something else going to change in a minute we're going to see. It will change the way we pray. Okay? Now the screen is going blank on me to try to stop me from teaching this, I think. Now it's actually a screensaver. All right, come on back, come on back. Come on back. Do I have to bribe you? Come on. I feel like I'm talking to my dog trying to get her to come across the room or something with a cat. Okay, come on. This thing. Did the computer? Ah, the computer shut itself off too. That's why I didn't find anything. Okay. All right, now. What we're seeing here is the righteousness of God is manifested. The other question I have is, what does he mean by it's been manifested? What does manifest literally mean? Actually, if it's the right word, it should...
Dwell within, or to...
Not really
It
manifest.
appears, it shows,
Yes,
yeah.
and it should be based on phino, I believe. Let me see.
It appears like it's
Yeah.
showing.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, it's actually based, a derivative of the Greek word phino, which basically is to shine.
Oh.
Or I shine, things like that. So, and it's a derivative of that. So essentially, it's the manifesting is the appearing, the shining light upon, etc. Okay, and what we've got to realize is when it's talking about the righteousness of God made manifest, I think what it's actually talking about is the fact that by Christ living a perfect life and dying on the cross, that is the revealing of, hey, this has been the plan all along. Finally, we see it. This is God's righteousness. So that's, I think, what it's talking about there. Okay, we hit the but now thing, we hit the, and remember, it is God's righteousness, not ours. We'll get to that more as we go on. Verse 22. Somebody read verse 22 for us, if you would.
Even the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all those who believe, for there is no distinction.
Okay. Tell you what, we're going to do this also. Let's stop that verse before for there's no distinction, because that's not, I don't believe that's broken up in the proper place. I think Lou says the same thing. That for there is no distinction, I believe, is actually part of verse, should be part of verse 23. I think they broke the verse, and it makes a lot more sense if you do it that way. So what we got is even the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all those who believe. First thing, what is he coming back to in the very first phrase?
The righteousness of God.
Right, it's God's righteousness, not ours. So two verses, he's already hit it twice. So it's obviously important, okay? Right. The righteousness of God, and then we've got it through faith in Jesus Christ for all those who believe. What he's showing is this is who it's going to be applied to. If you have faith in Jesus Christ and believe in him, that's where we're going to start dealing with the righteousness of God. Okay? Now, in, let me see, 22. Let me ask you a question. The end of that verse, for there is no distinction. What are some of the ramifications of that?
You mean like this?
What's it say about things, if we say there's no distinction, what's that say about things like racial discrimination?
There's no line in between.
No line. What's it say about something like racial discrimination in the church? If there's no distinction.
You're all the same, you're all equally.
You're all the same, so you shouldn't have racial discrimination, right? Or any kind of discrimination like that, okay? Also, would it mean that all believers are equally important to God?
Right.
Okay. Does it mean that all believers have equal functions?
Equal functions?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, let me say something to you. All of those things, I do not believe this verse is talking about at all. That's commonly how this verse is made to be talking about. I'm not saying we should discriminate and have racial discrimination, don't get me wrong. I'm going to take you to James and other places to show you, hey, there's a problem with that, okay? But that's not what this verse is talking about, because what we see is, for there is no distinction. Aha, I got this. We can't discriminate. Not only that, it also means everybody's equally important to God, and it also means everybody has the same function. Really. So should we all be preaching? Should we all be singing solos in the church? Should we all be down in the kitchen cooking? Should we?
I would say so, based on that.
I don't believe so.
That's not what
No.
this is talking about.
Wait.
We're going to get to what this is talking about in just a second. You're right. Here's the point. What did God say about the distribution of gifts through the Holy Spirit?
Oh, you're right.
Yeah. Here's the thing. It's almost like what we have in the Declaration of Independence or Constitution with all men are created equal.
Mhm.
Okay? Does that mean that everybody should live in the same house, that everyone has the same abilities, that everyone, if they want, can be a writer or an actor or whatever? No. There's difference in the people. It means equality of opportunity, basically.
Right.
And it doesn't even mean you're going to have the same chances in life, but it means no one is going to say, because you come from this class, therefore you can't do this, or
Right.
something like that. Same type of thing here, but my point is this, while all of these may be valid things to talk about, none of them are in the context of what Paul's talking about here. And frequently this gets pulled up. What is the context of what Paul's talking about so far in 20 and 21, 21 and 22?
What he's saying is that we all have the opportunity to be righteous.
Right. All have the opportunity to become believers. And if we split 22 in the right spot, instead we start with, for there is no distinction, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Does that make sense? Him saying, I don't care who you are, we're all sinners.
All sinners.
That's what that verse is talking about. So if you want, take a little line and put a line there. Break that apart or something like that, because that verse does not belong to be split. Now remember, verse divisions are not inspired. Chapter divisions are not inspired. Don't know if it's true or not. There was this rumor going around, I think it's apocryphal, but how do they do verse divisions? King James went riding on a bumpy road, and every time the pen hit the paper, it was a verse division. I think they made that one up, but the point is sometimes it looks like that. Verse divisions and chapter divisions are not divinely inspired. Matter of fact, if you looked at the original text, you'd find out there's not even word divisions. It's strings of letters, mostly all caps, all put together. So anyway, point is though, in this case, I think when they did it, they got it wrong as far as where to divide the verse. There's no distinction because everyone has sinned. Make more sense?
Mhm.
Makes a lot more sense. Okay? Now, what I want to do is this. We are actually going to take a break. And I'm sorry we only have 2 participants, but we're going to now have a fight for the coin. Okay? All right. We're going to take a break and we're going to go in the other room. I'll actually take the camera with me. We'll see if we can get this on tape or not. Come on, congratulations. Here's your Roman coin.
Thank you.
And it is real. And like I said, I'll bring another one in next week for you. With only 2 people, I think I can afford to do that.
Oh, thanks.
No problem. Wayne doesn't get one because he wasn't here, so if you watch the tape, sorry, that's what you get when you show up. Same for Isaiah. Okay. Now, the reason we wanted to do that is to think about the idea, because if you think about it, in most religions, in most cultures, and everything else, even with Christians, supposedly, what are we thinking about? We're thinking about our own righteousness and how far we got. Look, I'm better than you. I don't kick the dog. I don't cheat on my wife. I don't do this. I must be better than a guy down the street. I mean, after all, he's a drug addict who's, laying in the gutter or something like that. That drug addict laying in the gutter has no less advantage, I mean, you have no advantage over him when it comes to salvation if you're not a believer.
Right.
And so again, anybody who doesn't make it all the way to God's righteousness doesn't make it, period.
Right.
And not only that, what you got to remember is this, as I said last week, I think it was, there are 2 legitimate ways to salvation. One is believe on Jesus Christ through faith. The other is be perfect your entire life and don't be born a human. Because if you're born a human, you have a sin nature. And again, we talked about the fact that angels actually do go into heaven because they've never sinned, okay?
Right.
But the point is that among humans, no, it doesn't matter if you made it 90% of the way. Neither one of you 2 are old enough to remember Evel Knievel and the Snake River Canyon, are you?
No.
Okay. He originally came out and said he was going to jump it on a motorcycle. Now, it was like almost Grand Canyon size, okay? In the end, it turned out he was going to jump it in a rocket, okay? Did it live on Wide World of Sports and everything else. If the rocket goes off, he makes it like maybe halfway across or less, and all of a sudden you see a rocket going like this, okay? Had a parachute at least, okay?
Okay.
But the point was, it wouldn't have mattered whether he made it 1/3 of the way across, halfway across, 98% of the way across. If you don't make it 100%, it doesn't matter.
Right.
And that's pretty much what it was with the long jump. If you don't make it all the way across, you didn't hit God's righteousness, period. Okay? All right, we got everybody awake now. And next week we get Roman coins. And the screen switched on me, I think. Okay, now we've seen, let me ask you a question. Why do you think it says the glory of God instead of the righteousness? We all fall short of the glory of God instead of the righteousness of God. A little bit of personal opinion here, but I have an opinion, of course. Any idea? Because you think, fall short of the righteousness of God would make sense.
Right.
Why glory? I'll give you my opinion, okay?
Yeah.
I actually think that glory is more all-encompassing than righteousness is, because to be glorious in God's eyes, you have to be completely righteous to start with. Okay? So I think when it's saying the glory of God, it's talking about the righteousness of God, everything about God. You're just falling short of it. Now, that's a personal opinion. If you want to disagree with that, you're fine disagreeing with it. And who knows, I may even come up with a different opinion at some point in time as well. I think if I remember correctly, that was one where Moo had some opinions also, but didn't really nail it down, if I remember correctly, because we're not 100% sure why.
Right.
But I think that's what it's talking about, probably. Okay? Now, let's read 24. Who read 23?
And are justified by his grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus.
Okay, being justified as a gift by his grace through the redemption which is in Christ Jesus. We've got a number of little words there we've got to pay attention to. First thing we have to look at, hang on a second. First thing we have to look at is the word justified, being justified, okay? Anybody know what justified or justification means?
My mother always said,
Just as if I'd never sinned, exactly. That's accurate. Now, there's probably more we can say about it, but that's accurate, easy way to remember, just if I'd never sinned. Okay. Justified literally means to be acquitted or pronounced as righteous. Does it mean that you are righteous? Does it mean you never sinned?
No.
No.
You're just justified.
Right. You've been pronounced or acquitted. Think of it in a court situation. You go into court. It doesn't, if you are found innocent in court, actually not guilty in that case, but if you're found not guilty in court, it doesn't mean you didn't do it.
Right.
It may mean it's a bad court, it may mean they didn't have the evidence, it may mean any number of things. In this case, it's God pronouncing you as innocent even though you are not innocent. Which brings up some other questions, because God is not unjust, is he? And wouldn't it be the acts of an unjust God to pronounce somebody innocent who's not innocent? And let's face it, it would be.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's through his grace.
It is, but see, here's the first thing, you're hitting it there. First off, that's part of it. Being justified as a gift by his grace. Okay? So number one, it's a gift. We've already seen that. It's not something as a gift, it is not something we could ever work for. Okay? Something else is important here. Let's go back to justified for a minute. If I take you back into the Greek just a hair here, justified, it says here, being justified is actually a present passive participle in the Greek. Okay? Why is that important? Let me tell you why. In the Greek, there's several types of action. There's present, there's aorist, there's perfect. We'll talk about that later. Present is something that's either ongoing or just happens or whatever. Okay? Passive is the key here. There's active, middle, and passive verbs. Active verbs mean you're doing something. I run down the hall. I jumped in the long jump. That's active. Okay? I was run down by a truck is passive. Same verb, but totally different use. The action is done to me. Okay? Being justified is a passive participle, not an active participle. What's that tell you?
That it was, like it was just given to you.
What else does it tell you? You didn't do anything. Who did the work?
Jesus. Well,
God.
God did it.
Yeah. God did the work here, not us. Now, we still believe, and some people argue that belief itself is a work. I disagree with that. Okay? But my point being is that it's not us that ever did any of the work to be justified or for being justified. It's a passive participle, and with good reason. Okay? Now, when we are justified, first off, notice it is not a future verb. Okay? It's present. Which, does that tell you anything about when we are justified?
You said it's a present verb?
It's present. It's not future. Okay? If I said to you, we're going to go grab some dinner, as opposed to we're eating dinner, what's the difference?
You're going to do something in the future.
One's in the future, the other's present. If being justified is present passive, as opposed to future passive, what's that tell you?
means it's occurring.
or it occurred already, or it's occurring.
Yeah.
Right, it's something that is, and I think actually what's happening is the justification is complete justification. Once it's applied, it's always been applied and will be applied, okay? The point being is this, it is not something that's happening. Some people think justification is when I die, God's going to justify me and take me to heaven. We are justified right now as much as we will ever be. It's not a after we die type thing. It's right today, we're already justified before God.
You're saying that God has already justified every single person?
Every believer.
Every believer?
Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
Because we've already done
Once a person becomes a believer by faith as a gift, that person is justified in God's eyes completely. Now we're going to get to why in a minute. Verse 25, 26 is going to shed some light on that. Okay? Because we still have the issue of, could a just God simply say, I'm pronouncing you in? Think of it this way. Let's say that you had a guy and you watched him rob a bank and murder 3 people. Okay? And they haul the guy into court. And they get the guy into court, and the judge says, that's okay, don't worry about it, you're innocent. What would you say about that judge?
Just.
Yeah, you'd be screaming about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is what we're going to have to deal with here, because there is a reason why God can do this and not be unjust, which we're going to get to. But the first thing we have to see is, it's a gift, it's through His grace, which means He's giving it to us, and through the redemption, which is Jesus Christ. When we talk about the redemption, okay, what are we actually talking about with this particular word? Anybody have any idea, ever study that or anything?
redemption. It's like somebody who is.
And by the way, it's a noun here, it's not a verb in the original.
It's like He saved us from.
That's the result of the redemption, but what is the redemption itself?
Well, that's what my head was.
Okay, that's okay. The redemption, think of a kidnapping.
Correcting,
Think of a kidnapping. What is the redemption in a kidnapping?
be rescued, I guess.
The ransom, the noun. The redemption itself is the ransom. When you're probably, again, too young to remember it, S&H green stamps and yellow stamps and everything like that, you get them at the grocery store, you paste them in the books. When you're done with that, you take the books down, you go into this store and they have a bunch of crud all over the walls, and you pick something, you know, a clock or whatever. Look, I got a clock, here's my books. It was called a redemption center, where you would actually take your books and hand your books over to them, and they give you a gift in exchange for the books. So that was the redemption center back then. Similar type thing here, where the redemption is actually Jesus Christ Himself. He is the ransom in this case. He's the ransom that was paid. Okay? So, again, I'm being really, really picky here. I'm being really picky, but there's a reason for being picky.
No.
Hi. Are you in here, or have you been here before?
No, first day.
Okay, what is your name?
You know, Carleton?
You're not? Okay, I saw you on the list. Grab a seat, we'll talk later. Yeah, we'll talk later. I was going to say, you missed the first class, so we'll have to talk about that, but okay, we'll talk about that later. For now, just listen in and we'll see what's going on.
Yes, sir.
We're in Romans chapter 3 right now.
All right.
Okay? Now, here's what I was going to say. Christ Himself is that redemption, or is that ransom. And the reason I'm being picky again is, once we understand the exact process of what's happening in salvation, then you're going to be able to see the results and what's going on. Okay? All right. We looked at the redemption already, which is in Christ Jesus. He is the redemption. Now, 25, we're going to see something that is a big deal. And it's something I won't say almost every, a lot of people skip over. The reason is because it's a big word and nobody wants to learn that word. Not quite. You're getting there. Okay? Heather, would you read verse 25 for us?
Whom God displayed publicly as a propitiation.
Propitiation. You got it. Okay. Propitiation.
Propitiation. Propitiation.
And I'm going to make you learn that in this class because you're going to need it.
I can even say it when I'm reading it.
Okay, let's go ahead. Propitiation.
Propitiation in His blood through faith. This much to demonstrate His righteousness, because of the forbearance of God, He passed over the sins previously committed.
Okay. Has anybody ever told you guys what propitiation is before, or have they just avoided that because they really didn't want to discuss it? Yeah, exactly. You don't find that in most churches even. They don't talk about what is the propitiation. This is one of the most important words in the Bible. Okay? The propitiation is a word that was in use before the Bible. It's not just a Christian word. Okay, if we go back and look at it. Propitiation was something that was given to appease the wrath of a God who has been offended. Okay? With idols, propitiation literally would have meant, you know, okay, we hacked up a pig and we threw some oranges on the altar and hopefully we feed you and you're happy now and now you're not going to strike us dead and make the volcano erupt.
Right.
Okay. We're beyond that. We're not talking about it. But here's the point. The propitiation in God's case was there had to be something paid to God to satisfy his wrath. Any idea what that was paid to God?
Jesus sacrifice.
And what verse did we just finish? Verse 24?
Right.
What was Jesus?
He's the redemption.
The redemption, the ransom. So it is Jesus Christ himself who was actually paid to God as the propitiation. You see what I'm getting at there?
Yeah.
All of a sudden what's happening is, if God were an unjust God, he would have just said, no problems, forget about it, no big deal. I don't care if you sinned or not. I mean, come on in, okay? Party's open.
Right, that's why he's able to
right. That's the reason that he's able to do. You got it.
Yeah.
You got, because without that, he can't just say, if he just said, I'll just forget about your sins, no propitiation, there's no salvation because he's an unjust God.
Right, but there was something.
Right. So through the ransom was paid to God to appease God's wrath. Now it doesn't mean he was angry at Jesus Christ. What it's saying is this had to be done, a perfect sacrifice had to be made.
Somebody had to take the...
Right, somebody had to take the fall. Yeah, exactly, you got it. And that's pretty much it. And that's also the reason why Christ can save everyone, or everyone who believes, is because he was perfect and therefore his perfect righteousness is applied. Remember also, it's the righteousness of God, not the righteousness of man. So what's happening here is we're talking about the righteousness of God, Jesus Christ's righteousness, is applied to our account because he is the ransom, and as the ransom, God's wrath is able to be satisfied. The satisfaction of his wrath is twofold. Number one, it means you're not going to hell. That's a biggie, okay? But number two, there's something else. Let's say that I invited you over to my house, okay? And I said, come on over, I'm going to have pizza tonight. And you came over to the house and I said, well, all right, you're here, come on in. Open the door and you kind of walk in. Well, if you really want it, there's pizza on the counter, but I paid good money for that, but you can have it, I'll let you have it. What would you be thinking?
Guilty.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I may be offering you hospitality, but I'm really not, okay? The fact is, if I came over to you and I said, hey, I brought pizza, come on over to the house, we had a good time, we had a party and everything else, that's a totally different story. Okay? That's what we forget about here with God, because so often what's happening is we're seeing God as the propitiation was done to save us from our sins so that we don't go to hell. Great, that's step one. That's only a small piece of it. What's also happened is our relationship has been restored with God. And once that relationship is restored with the Father, through the action of the Son, through the ransom of the Son, as the propitiation, all of a sudden that means we can stand before God already sinless in God's eyes. We still commit acts of sin. I would argue we commit acts of sin, but we are not sinners anymore. Kind of a strange difference here, but if you think about it, in God's eyes, when God looks at you, whose righteousness does he see? Jesus, not yours. So if he's looking at Jesus' righteousness, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, what acts are you going to do to corrupt Jesus' righteousness?
Nothing.
You can't. Exactly. So this is why I'm so picky about going through this. Now, let me ask you another question. You got your hand up. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, I was scratching.
That's okay. That's okay. You know, I used to do auctions all the time. I was terrified to scratch my head. You know, like, you own it. You know. No. Anyway, fortunately, the auctioneers got to know me and they realized that's not what I meant. If I'm going to bid, it's like this, okay? I had one guy who actually called me the Statue of Liberty in the back of the room. But anyway, the point is that what we're talking about here is the fact that now that we understand some of the process, what are some of the ramifications of this, especially in relationship to prayer? First of all, who do you pray to?
Jesus.
You do. I don't.
I'm sorry, we pray to God in Jesus' name. We ask Him.
Who specifically with God? All three parts of God, or who?
Father.
I pray to the Father, just like Jesus taught us to pray.
Right.
I pray to the Father through Jesus because of Jesus, or not through, to the Father through the power of the Holy Spirit, because of what Jesus Christ has done to restore the relationship. Okay? If Jesus Christ didn't act as a propitiation, and give complete forgiveness, we would have absolutely no right to stand before God the Father in prayer. Period. Because he would be looking at us and be saying, you may be getting in here, but you're sinning. You're still the sinner. That's not happening. Which what it's going back to is, that's why when we talked about when does salvation happen, it doesn't happen when you die, or not justification rather. Justification doesn't happen when you die, it happens the moment you believe. That's when you're justified. If you weren't justified, you couldn't pray. Well, you could, but God wouldn't listen. God's not going to answer it. Because you wouldn't be his child. Because what's happening is we become his child, and actually it means something. It's not just a bunch of words. And again, when you think about it, if you were to come over to my house and I didn't know you, and you just showed up at the door and knocked on the door and said, I'm here, get the pizza out, I might have a few questions for you. You might get fed eventually, but we have a little chat first, okay? If I had a child and that child showed up at the door and said, I'm here, Dad, get the pizzas out, I'd be like, sure, no problem. I had a key to my father's house until he died. Well, I still did at my mom's house, but I had a key to my dad's house when he was alive. Anytime I wanted to, I could go over to his place, I could go in the refrigerator, get a drink out, I could sit down and watch the Redskins game with him or whatever else. Never would have been any question, and he would have been happy to see me. Because I was his child, there was nothing standing between us. Right. We're going to see later on in Romans that we were actually predestined to adoption as sons and daughters as well. That's going to play into it as well. But Paul has to build this foundation first before filling us in on that. But now do you start to see why Paul had to break this down into step by step by step by step what's happening? Because you can't understand the Christian life, we can't understand our relationship to God, we can't understand our relationship to God in prayer or anything else until we understand what's actually happened. And the fact that it's not our righteousness, it's God's righteousness applied to us, which we're going to hit in chapter 4. There's going to be another word you're going to have to learn in chapter 4 that you're going to appreciate and understand, okay? Now, by the way, when I talked about in 24 about the redemption, that's the same word that literally would have been used for buying back a slave or a captive. So when Jesus Christ was ransomed, he was like buying back a slave or a captive. That's what happened. Well, what was captive? We were the captives, essentially.
I think Moo says it that way too.
Yeah, exactly. And I love the Moo book. You know what I tried? Instead of going through his book I think is wonderful. What I've decided is teach from the Bible, teach from the notes I've come up with. We're going to be teaching pretty much the same thing Moo's teaching, probably just in more depth.
Right.
But the point is that I hope to hit you from two different sides, through his words and through my words together, really God's word, but I'm trying to interpret them faithfully, and then you get the whole picture of it. Now there are very few books, commentaries that I can look at and I can pretty much unequivocally recommend this to you. Most of the time they're, well, yeah, but you better know about this, you better know about that, you better know about that. This one, no, the differences I have with Moo in this book are so minor they're almost not worth mentioning. There are a few, but they're just minor theological points. There's nothing that we're in major disagreement on, which I was thrilled. And as I said, if you ever get to the point where you want to go deeper in Romans, I can't recommend a commentary more highly than his large commentary, the one I showed you on the New International Commentary of the New Testament. Excellent book. All right.
There was 2 points about God's wrath.
About God's wrath. Number one, the first point is the fact that we are saved from hell.
Oh, okay.
The second point is our relationship is restored.
Oh, okay.
It's more than just a get out of jail free card. I mean, think about it. Honestly, how many Christians you know think of salvation as a get out of jail free card? We do a lot of times. I mean, that happens. And they'll still go to heaven. It's not like they're going to do that, but I mentioned earlier, they're going to heaven, but they're not going to enjoy the trip as much because they don't realize. It's almost like somebody, this Christmas, I talked about the fact that I'm going to Europe. Okay? I'm not paying for most of it. I got it on points. Okay? I'm flying British Air first class, going to Frankfurt to start with, then we're going to Bavaria, Prague, London, Paris. Great trip, okay? Right. And again, half the hotels are free also because of points, okay? My point is this, I would never pay for first class, but it's been given to me essentially, so I'll take it. I could, if I wanted to, probably go into that plane, argue with the stewardess, and sit in the back of the coach if I wanted to. Instead, I'm going to go into that plane. I'm going to have 2 seats, one that I sit in, one that faces me. So if I want to have somebody over to my seat for dinner for that night while I'm flying, we can do that. I'm going to have my own desk. I'm going to have the whole thing's going to fold down, or you press a button and it's going to go down to a 6.5 foot long flat bed. Sometimes I think some of the airlines, they bring out these memory foam cushions to put down underneath you. They supply me with pajamas. I don't have to bring my own pajamas. They supply me with slippers. I'm not kidding. This is what true international first class is like, okay? However, and again, I'd never pay for it. The numbers are obscene as far as that goes, okay? But if they're going to give it to me for free, I'll take it. But here's my point. If I wanted to, I could probably find somebody in Coach to trade with me.
Yeah.
And you know something else? How many Christians are living their lives like they're living their life with God in Coach when He's already provided first class? That's what's happening. I mean, think about it. So many Christians are thinking about not realizing the restored relationship, and it's just a get out of jail free card. They going to heaven? Yep. They're going to heaven, but they're not going to have as nice a ride as I'm going to have in first class, I guarantee it.
Right.
And the food's not going to be as good either. But anyway, it's an illustration, but you're starting to see the point is that we miss the point so many times that we've got so much more than just, okay, you're not going to hell. Anyway, one thing we'll go through 25 also. It talks about propitiation, His blood through faith, rather. My old lisp is coming back. His blood through faith. Yeah, go ahead.
What really make a lot of Christians miss the point, like you said?
Number one, my personal opinion. Most Christians don't know the Bible. Think about it. How many Christians you know that actually take the time to go through the book of Romans and find out, this is Paul's letter that lays out the entire message of Christianity step by step so that we can see what's happening. How many Christians, even in churches, you guys have been to churches, how many of your pastors are preaching on propitiation? That's a word that every believer should know, and yet hardly any ask, what's propitiation? It's a big, long word that we don't know how to pronounce. I think, number one, people don't understand what's happening. Because the point is, knowledge doesn't save a person. You have to have certain basic knowledge to know what you're believing in. But even though the knowledge doesn't save a person, as we learn more about God and as we learn about the process of what's happening, we can come to the realization of what God's really done. And think about it also, what's happening too. There's a phrase I use that I've seen over and over. Saved by grace, lived by the law. And I see that all the time in churches. People have been saved by grace, but they feel like they're under God's condemnation still. And then they want to try to make themselves right before God by living by the law. No, it's saved by grace, live by grace.
Right.
And as we get to chapter 5 and 6, you're going to find out it's not punishment, it's relationship that causes us to behave properly. Okay? But the point is that I think we missed the boat simply because most of us really don't take God seriously as seriously as we should. I hate to say it, but think about it. Your average Christian, are they really putting the time not only into their Bible, but, I mean, you guys are here in Bible college learning this stuff. How many people in your church are in Bible college or things like that? How many people are being taught this kind of stuff?
Or
Yeah.
or they know it, but they don't apply it.
Well, that's another thing, too. You know what happens? They may know it, but their feelings tell them they're under condemnation. Those feelings, they're coming from their inner self, and that's all it is. It's a lie. It's a lie. It's a lie that the devil will use. I don't mean him personally, but it's a lie that the kingdom of Satan will use to try to tell us, you're not really good enough to stand before God. Okay? That's the crazy irony, is we still commit sins, but you are absolutely perfect before God, period. Let me give you an example of something that happened years ago. I'll never forget. I don't think I've given this example yet. Been a big Redskins fan for years. I think I told you before, I don't know if I did or not, I had a tryout as a kicker with them years ago also. Yeah, one day, gone, but hey, I have kicked on the AstroTurf for Redskin Park over in Herndon. It was fun, okay. Seriously, it's one of those things that I'd rather try and fail than never try at all. Anyway, here's what I was going to say. I came home one night and I was with a girl, and I was standing on her carport, and I was wearing a Redskins cap. What colors are the Redskins colors? Burgundy and gold.
Oh.
True, not red. Burgundy and gold. Okay. We're standing there, and she had a bug light on the porch. And it was, cool enough that you still had the bug light on, but, I had the stretch cap on and everything. And I'm looking at this, I pulled the cap off, and I'm like, what in the world is going on here? I looked at the cap, and the cap was burgundy and pure white. Whiter than that paper there was. The most pure white I've ever seen. Okay? If you take physics someday, great thing to do, I was going to say, you'll find out light is actually a wave. And the frequency and the speed, the wavelength is actually what determines what color we see. Okay? Reflected light, or reflected colors are actually a reflection. They have wavelength also as they come off. If your light and your reflected light, and it can happen with sound too or anything, but if your light and reflected light actually have identical wavelengths by some coincidence, they cancel each other out and it turns pure white. You can actually have a black object which would appear pure white if you had the right black shining onto the black object. Okay? When the gold portion of the hat got hit, it became the most pure white I've ever seen. And you actually do it. Believe it or not, there are ways to cancel out a person's voice by sending the right wave back at them. Not high tech, we're not going to talk about that, but the point is that the waves cancel out. What happened was, all of a sudden I realized, wait a second. And I know this is an illustration, it's not biblical, okay? But all of a sudden I thought, though your sins be as scarlet, red, like the blood of Christ. Like God looking through the blood of Christ at me, at my sins. What does God see? Pure white, snow white. Now, that's an illustration, so don't be going, well, God's actually got this blood filter up there. I don't mean that. But I think it applies, and the point is that, no, when God sees us, He doesn't see the sin to screw up the relationship. He sees the relationship perfect. He still sees we are sinners, and we still need to go to God at times. I have no problem with a Christian repenting. Repenting means turning away from the sin. Yeah, one thing I've used before is an illustration, and I hope you get the right answer to this one, or we're going to have real trouble, okay? If you're married, right? If I said to you, Lucas, I had a chat with your wife. She absolutely adores you. She thinks she's wonderful. Remember, she loves you so much, she said to me, you know, anytime Lucas wants to, he can just smack me in the face or punch me in the face to discipline me and just keep me in line, okay? If I said that to you, would you suddenly start saying, all right, now I got my shots in? No. No, why? Would you hit your wife?
No.
Of course not. Why?
It's wrong.
It's not only wrong, that's part of it. You love her, right?
Right.
You've got a relationship with her, right?
Right.
So you wouldn't even think of punching her in the face because you love her and have her. Nobody had to take a law and say, Carleton, you're not allowed to beat your wife.
Right.
I've never hit my wife. I will never hit my wife. Nobody ever had to threaten me with a law for that. Okay, same with you.
Right.
Hopefully with your husband too. Anyway, the point being is that what I'm trying to say is this. It is the relationship that should motivate us to live God's lives and live without the threat of God sitting there with a stick over our heads. You ever go to the circus and they got the whack-a-mole games, you know, bang, 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 like that? You used to be good at that. But anyway, here's the point. It's not, you know, some people think, you know, it's like I heard, you know, years ago my wife jokingly say about it was the whack-a-linda game and things like that. That is not God. That's not what God's doing. We may have problems in our life, but it's not like God's sitting there looking at us that way. God's looking at us like He's looking through the filter and seeing the perfect justified person that's happened. Again, think of all this as a judicial pronouncement, and because of the judicial pronouncement with a real penalty that's actually been paid for with a redemption, because of that, God can have that relationship and there's no problems there. If it weren't for that, there is no way God could have a relationship with us, period. Couldn't happen. At least not the kind we have. There would be a relationship, but it would be a relationship of judgment, wrath, and anger.
Right. Not
Not a relationship of a loving God and a loving Father. So that's what we're getting back there. Long way, but that answer your question? Okay, good. Okay, let me see. We talked about the propitiation sum, and let me see where we are here. Oh yeah, time to go to the next slide on the board. Now, one of the things we're going to see here also, and there's some things we're skipping over a little bit, just for time's sake, okay? Actually, I want to go into this a little now that I say that. We already talked about demonstrating about God demonstrating His righteousness because He paid the price. One of the things that is said here is, let me see, in 25, because of the forbearance of God, He passed over the sins previously committed. What does that mean? Previously committed.
Say it again.
Because of the forbearance of God, He passed over the sins previously committed. Does that mean He only forgave the sins you did, and then you have to be forgiven over and over and over again for the remaining sins? Why did He say previously committed?
Is he talking about the sins committed before Jesus?
He's talking about the sins in our lives that we previously committed. It's a trick question unless you know Greek. Okay. This is something, I'm not expecting you to. This is something where I hate to say it, but there are some things in the Bible you cannot get out of the English. You can get out of the commentary, somebody telling you this, but it's not there in the English. In the Greek, we talked about the present, we talked about aorist, I think, before. I don't know if we have or not, but you'll hear these terms in college a little bit. There is a tense in the Greek called a perfect tense. In this case, it's a perfect participle. Okay? But the key to the perfect tense is there's a couple things it can mean, but generally what it means is something that's already happened, it's already occurred, but the effects of it are continuing onward, okay? So, for example, if I say, I bought my house, does that mean, well, I bought it then, but now I'm sitting out on the street because I only owned it for 3 seconds because that's when I bought it? No, essentially it's the same as the perfect concept in English. I bought my house and I'm still living in my house. 8 years later, I still have my house, okay? Similar here, when it says the sins previously committed, what it's actually talking about is the fact that all of your past sins have been committed, but so is everything continuing on. The result of that forgiveness is all of your sins have been forgiven. So even though in the English it looks a little weird, it's not. It's actually saying everything you've ever done or ever will do is already forgiven. Right, it's not based on your actions again. If it were based on your actions, it wouldn't be Christ's righteousness, it would be your righteousness.
Why do you gotta say it like that?
Yeah, exactly. Well, let me say this, in the Greek it actually makes sense, and you go, oh, that's a beautiful way to say that. In the English it's like, yeah, we're getting the point across, but part of the problem is a lot of times the perfect tense, it might take 5 words to translate 1 word in the English. So they just shortcut and do it this way. I guess maybe they figured people won't really be studying it. Now, we talked about, stepped on something, anyway, we talked about the fact of, we talked about the fact of a just God can't just skip over things, okay? Mm-hmm. Don't want to keep going to story time, but let me do it anyway. I will never forget being in Prince George's County District Court many, many years ago, like about 1 billion years ago or something. Anyway, I had been ticketed by a police officer for speeding. I was a little over the limit. I wasn't where he said I was, okay? Should I have been ticketed or not? I don't know. Here's what I'm going to say. This same officer had ticketed a bunch of people. The first guy got up and said, Your Honor, I have already checked on this. I have found out that the equipment he used was no longer calibrated properly and not under certification. It was on an illegal frequency that the FCC had changed and said the county police had no right to use that frequency anymore. It was used improperly. He was able to demonstrate all these things, okay? The only defense the officer had is, well, my sergeant told me to keep doing it. And to me, that's not a real good justification, okay? The judge said, under Maryland law, you are presumed guilty, so therefore you're guilty even with all you've shown. Now, that presumption of guilt shouldn't apply when you can prove that it wasn't done properly, right. Okay? I think that's why a bunch of us got caught. I think the machine was miscalibrated and using an improper frequency. However, in this whole string of people, every single one guilty except for one, okay? One girl walked up to the, the defendant's podium, and to be honest, extremely attractive girl. Probably 5'10", long blonde hair, had a skirt that almost covered her hips, okay? You know, very inappropriate for court, let's put it that way, okay? She walks up, and she was like 30 over the limit or something. I mean, mine was like, he said 10 over, and I said I was 4 over or 5 over, okay? And I got found guilty. She was like 30 over the limit, and the judge starts questioning her. He says, so why were you speeding? Well, I was late, so I had to speed. She was probably about, I think she was 19 years old, okay? Somewhere in that area. He said, what do you mean you had to speed? She said, well, I had to go to class. I was on my way to college, and I was late, and I was running late for a class, so I had to speed. And he questioned her, well, don't you realize it's wrong to speed and everything? No, but I was late for class, I had to speed. I mean, you talk about the worst defense you can imagine. She had it, okay? Basically, it was like, I did it, I'm going to do it again. Hey, that's the way it goes, okay? Every single one of us got fined and got points on our record except for her. You know what she got? She was told by the judge that she had about a week to write a 3-page paper on why it's wrong to sin, and then after the court closed one night to come to his chambers privately and present to him what the results of that paper were and give him an oral presentation on the paper. Now, no pun there, but yeah, who knows? My point is this. That was the classic definition of an unjust judge. So think about it. In that situation, you're rolling your eyes, you should be, okay? Because the judge was unjust. Same thing here. If God simply said, that's okay, you sinned, I don't care, that would be an unjust God. There had to be a ransom, there had to be a redemption, and it had to be done to satisfy the propitiation. Were it not for that, God would be nothing more than that PG County District Court judge. It's that simple, exactly, it's that simple. And I don't even know what happened when she went to meet him. My point is this, the appearance was horrible. Just awful as far as the appearance of what happened. Now, let's go to Romans 3, 27 through 31. Okay? Tell you what, Enoch, let's turn to you. Why don't you read 27, why don't you read 27 for us? Loudly.
Where then is boasted? It is excluded. On what principle? On that of observing the law? No. But on that of faith.
Okay? Question. What's he trying to... First, does this verse remind anybody of any verses in the Bible, any other verses in the Bible? I know me personally, there's one verse that comes to mind immediately when I start reading about this, about what are you doing boasting? Ephesians 2, 8, 9, and 10. That salvation is not by works, but by faith, and you have no one has any reason to boast. Isn't that what he's really saying here is, wait a second, if it's God's righteousness, and God's paid the price, and God's done the justification, and Christ was the redemption, and it's God's wrath that was satisfied, what are you telling me about the works of the law that you did to justify yourself for? That's boasting. That's garbage. It doesn't do a thing. Remember, in our long jump competition, it doesn't matter how righteous you thought you were, if you don't make it all the way to God's mark, you end up in the pit. Same thing here is the fact that it's a situation where there's just no reason to boast. And none of us have any reason to boast because before God, in our natural state, we are all sinners. So, now, question I have is 327. Talks about the law of faith. Moo talks about this also. What's he talking about with the law of faith? Any ideas? If you don't know, that's okay. This isn't an easy question.
Law of faith.
Any ideas? I think it's actually just a play on words. I don't think he's trying to say there is an actual law of faith as such. He's trying to contrast this to the law where you're working your way, and then turns around and talks about the law of faith. And Moo said this came to the same conclusion. It's basically a play on words. That he's trying to say, hey, it's no longer works, or it's never been works. It's not works, but it's faith. And that's why he's using the term law of faith. It's not to say there's this new law that we're actually following now. Now that we're off the Mosaic law, we're on the faith law. No. It's faith by grace, etc. Now, one of the things I want to point out is 328. Lucas, could you read that for us? This is an important verse for a reason.
For we hold that one is justified by faith apart from works of the law.
Okay. He could have stopped that verse right in the middle of the verse and said, we hold that we're justified by faith. He didn't. What did he add to the end of it?
Apart from the law.
Apart from works of the law. Right. This is one of the key verses that changed Martin Luther. And he ended up changing everything that came after him because of it. Because what happens here, think about what he was under. He was under a Catholic faith, which was saying faith plus works equals salvation.
Right.
And there it says, justified apart from works of the law. How do you get faith plus works when Paul's saying explicitly here, apart from the works? Right. And this was a key verse for Luther. Without this verse, I don't know. I'm not sure where he would have gone, but certainly this, and in chapter 1 we talked about the verses also. This was a key verse where Luther realized, hey, this is critical here. This is something where it can't be part of the law. Now, in addition to that, he's making it known that everyone is saved by faith. In addition to that, Paul's going back to his point in 29 and 30. Tell you what, could you read 20? And we're not going to read every verse in Romans, but in this case, remember, I said chapter 3, the end of it, we're taking very slowly because of what it is.
Right.
Could you read 29 and 30 for us?
Sure. Or is God the God of Jews only? Is he not the God of Gentiles also? Yes, of Gentiles also. Since indeed God, who will justify the circumcised by faith and the uncircumcised through faith, is one.
Right. What do you think he's trying to say here?
I think he's saying that God is the God of both Jews and Gentiles.
Okay.
And he's saying also that God is the one who will justify the one circumcised
Yeah.
and uncircumcised.
Now Lucas is just aching to get in here. What are you going to add to that?
I was because if they're thinking that it's through works of the law, then that basically prohibits the Gentiles to have a chance at salvation.
Right. That's exactly what's happening
The law
here.
was given to the Jews.
You were right in what you said. I'm not knocking it, but you're hitting it also. What he's doing is he's saying, look, I just talked about apart from works of the law. If it was by law, I've already told you this is the God of the Gentiles and the God of the Jews. How did the Gentiles get saved through the law? Because they didn't even know about it.
Right.
So, or today, how would they get saved through it, etc. So that's exactly what's happening here. He's saying, look, forget the Jew and Gentile thing, forget the law thing. It's faith, period. Believe in what God has already done, not what you're doing. Okay? And that's what's coming down here. So that actually just nails exactly what we're talking about. And 31. Back to you, Enoch.
Do we then nullify the law by his faith? Not at all, rather we uphold the law.
Okay. Any idea, you or anyone in here, any idea what this is getting at? This is a critical point for understanding the law and salvation and a number of other things. And if we hadn't just learned what we'd already learned, we could not understand this. Anything? What do you think he's talking about? Do we then nullify the law through faith? May it never be. On the contrary, we establish the law. Huh? I thought the law was dead. What does it mean we establish the law? What does it mean we don't nullify the law? Any ideas?
I think because I'm trying to remember what we was talking about. Talking about because I remember extensive reading about Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
So
Next chapter, but yes.
Oh.
That's okay. No, it's good. Bring it up.
Well, because Abraham was essential when we were talking about the I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't think that I guess what he's trying to say is that he doesn't want to do away with the law.
Right.
Essentially.
Does that mean the law is still applicable then, if he's not doing away with the law?
Well, no, he doesn't want them to think that they can be saved through the law. He just wants them to understand that the law is important.
Okay. Let me throw something else at you. Does it make any difference that in Matthew 5:17, Christ said he came to fulfill the law, not abolish it? He wasn't going to abolish the law either, was he?
Right.
Doesn't that mean we still have the law and we're under the law? After all, Christ didn't abolish it, he fulfilled it.
Well, yeah.
It's done.
It's a trick question. It's okay. I'm really trying to screw with your minds right now, so don't worry about this, okay? Think back to verse 25. What was that key word in verse 25 that was so hard to pronounce?
So propitiation?
Propitiation, exactly. How does that have to do with the fulfillment of the law as opposed to the abolition of the law? Any ideas if you think about that?
Well, I have to appease God's wrath,
So it's all together then.
Jesus.
Right. Abolishing the law would have said, come on in guys, I don't care.
Right.
That would have been abolishing the law. Fulfilling the law says, the law never got thrown away, the law has been completed.
Right.
It has been fulfilled. Why? The propitiation has been done to appease God's wrath by the perfect redemption. So when Christ says that he's come to fulfill the law, not abolish it, he doesn't mean two things. When he said that, he was still under the law.
Right.
Because the law didn't end until after Christ's death, okay? But secondly, and even more important, was the fact that he didn't mean that we were still going to be under the law.
He's coming to put an end to it.
He's
finish it.
He's
Complete it,
fulfilling it. That's the best word I can
Fulfilling,
come up with, okay? He's fulfilling the law. That's the whole point. So he's not saying, hey, just forget the law. An unjust judge would say, forget the law, doesn't matter, don't worry about it, no big deal. Say he killed a few people, doesn't everybody ever so often? So on the other hand, a just judge would say, I've already paid the penalty.
So what he's saying is you can't get rid of the law because the law
Well, he's
is
saying
part of all.
the law, I would argue now the law has been completed.
Complete.
The Mosaic law.
Right.
So I would say the Mosaic law, the reason we're under it is because the Mosaic law was ultimately leading to one thing, the payment of a sacrifice by Jesus Christ. That's what all the animal sacrifices were pointing to. Why do we not sacrifice animals anymore?
One sacrifice was made already.
Been completed, right. That's been done. The law essentially has been fulfilled by that one act. So that's what he's talking about fulfilling the law. And again, if we don't understand propitiation and we don't understand the redemption and don't understand justification and the method of salvation, we can't understand what it means to fulfill the law without abolishing it. And the point is that once we understand that, it also, because you know what happens with a lot of people? They get to this point of, well, he said he can't fulfill it, not abolish it. That means we're still under it. Therefore, and all of a sudden you're getting all this legalism being applied and everything else, and all these works we're going to do once we're saved. We do good works as a result of the relationship, not because there's a whole, and we're going to get to this later in Romans, trust me, not because there's a rule book we've all been given. That's what it's talking about. And that's what we're seeing right here. And that's pretty much how we're ending chapter 3 right there.
How do we uphold the law?
How do we do what?
The law.
Where does it say it? You're talking
the
about
law on the last part of 31.
We established the law.
We established it.
Yeah, I mean, uphold, I guess you could put it that way. I think established is a better translation right there. Yeah, definitely a better translation. We established the law. Even if you said uphold it, meaning it's fulfilled. It's not, because see again, an unjust judge would simply say, forget the law. You know, we don't need the law, we're just going to throw it out. Christ never threw out the law, he completed it, he fulfilled it. He established it. But that doesn't mean established to keep being under the law. He's freed us from the law by his actions of fulfilling the law. And again, right now, you're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. As we get further into Romans, we're going to have to deal specifically with what is the law and is the law dead. And I will give you a heads up on that. The biggest argument I ever had in seminary was when we had the discussion board and the professor put out on there, what did Paul mean when he said the law was dead? And my answer was, it means the law is dead. And I said it means that it's no longer applicable. And I said, oh, he just, you know, blew a gasket right then and there on his computer. I'm surprised his computer didn't melt, okay? And he was all upset about this and going on, and really just, you know, you can't believe that, and went through what he believes and everything. In the beginning, not only him, all the students in the class were jumping on me for it. What do you mean the law is dead? Don't we still have to do this? Don't we still have to do that? And my answer, by the time I got done answering all of them, 2/3 in the class ended up agreeing with me and 1/3 with him by the time we finished the discussion board. In the beginning, it was not a single person agreed with it. And what it came down to is, you know, we're going to go into this in more depth as we go on, but remember again, the law being dead doesn't mean there was no such thing as right and wrong. Cain killed Abel, and it was still wrong thousands of years before the Mosaic law existed. When God wiped out everybody but Noah, okay, Moses hadn't even been born. There was no Mosaic law at that point in time. Why? They were still sinners. They were still doing wrong. Because remember last week, what did we say right and wrong is defined by? Is it by what the Bible says is right and wrong?
It's by what God is
Offending God.
What I would say is, even offending God's getting there, I would say that right and wrong is defined by the character and nature of God. And anything that is contrary to the character and nature of God is wrong. Anything that is not contrary to that is not wrong. So that's why I'm saying, for example, if you kill a person, you're actually killing the image of God in that person, which I believe still exists, as a matter of fact. The three-part being is my opinion, even though there's divergent views. But the point is, it's wrong to steal because God wouldn't steal. Things like that. So the point being is that that's real, because again, when you say the Bible says so, well, that's not really the answer. The Bible is a reflection of God's character. It's not what defines God's character, if that makes sense to you.